Welcome back, everyone, to episode 6. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast, where we talk everything political commentary, revolutionary thinking, and protest music. I am 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am well, 4AS. Thank you very much. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. And I was actually thinking to myself, based on what we talked about previously, about, Vladimir Lenin's book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. And I think we kind of glossed over some of its major aspects. So I thought it might be good for us today to kind of dive a little bit more deeper. And I think a huge concept of that book is left-wing factions.
Right. Yeah, look, I must admit, and this is why, I brought it up with you, in conversation just before, I'm a little bit disenfranchised at the moment, a little bit disillusioned with what is going on in terms of like the left. And like when I say that, I don't mean any form of the left in particular, or like as a general term, I really mean in terms of the working class left, like the working class movement, and how that relates to basically like some type of revolutionary struggle. But like I see a lot of problems in the sense that there is a heavy form of sectarianism going on in the left today, and not that that's a problem of today. Apparently, it's got roots going right back to the beginning of the workers' movement, and modern ideas of leftism coming out of the Industrial Revolution. But I have a big problem with it. I've encountered some stuff very recently that has just made me question reality, what's really going on. If there is a general understanding that this is the struggle that needs to be had, and this is a way of revolutionizing the society to try and make the world a better place, the sectarianism, the division on how to get there. But more than that, sectarianism is about actually the hatred of the others as well. That's the thing that's getting me. Why is there not just the division, but the hatred for other forms of people that are all trying to achieve the same thing? That's what I'm trying to get my head around at the moment for us.
Yeah, and I guess we should also make a distinction of, like, when you think of a division like that, you think of an us versus them. But what makes, I guess, this type of sectarianism quite bad, if you will, is, well, ultimately you are standing up for similar values. So like what you believe in, but it's more a division of how to achieve something. Yeah. And ultimately it's very poisonous. It takes away from the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's counterproductive. It's counterintuitive, if you ask me. Like it just doesn't make sense. Why? Yes, okay, there are nuances to things, and there's always, I guess, going to be some people thinking that maybe one option is better than another and all that sort of stuff. But again, they're just options, and the end game is the same thing. Like, let me be more specific here for the viewers and stuff like that. Like, let's have a look at socialism, or the goals and the aspirations of socialists. Now, socialists are, in essence, a group of people that believe that changing the ownership of the means of production in society will revolutionize it. That's pretty much what a socialist is. And like why I link that to the working class movement is because generally they believe along the lines that it is the working class that will inherit those means of production of the capitalist class, which currently is our mode of economy globally. And if the working class was to be able to seize the means of production, then, you'd have that type of revolution and that change, the thing that, I'm constantly looking for, that revolution. That would be a way of achieving it. So socialists, it doesn't matter, I guess, where they align themselves, they are looking to achieve that, seizing the means of production somehow. So the socialists out there are varied. And they come in many shapes and forms and sizes, and they come from all corners of the globe, and there's many interpretations on what socialism is and all this sort of stuff. But I've recently come into contact with some people that are self-identified as Marxists specifically, and they would call themselves, undeniably the only form of socialist out there. Now, that was very strange to me because, like I explained before, socialist is this big umbrella term, and it captures so many different types of thought. And for one particular section of that socialist kind of umbrella to be like, we are it, we define the whole movement, and everybody else, literally, what the sentiment and the rhetoric was, everybody else is wrong. And by extension, they're not really socialists. And it was just so perplexing and astounding to me. I was dumbfounded at the time. I really didn't know what to say and what to make of this situation. But basically, the elitist language that was coming out of these people's faces. And I'm not to say that all Marxists are like this, but this particular group of people were just basically bad-mouthing anyone on the left or in the working class movement that didn't align with their thoughts. Now, they were easily and readily able to explain to me what their end goal was, and that was revolution, emancipation of the working class, and seizing the means of production, which is the same goal as every other socialist or leftist that comes under the umbrella term. So why the animosity? Why the disdain for other people with the exact same intentions and objectives as them? I just couldn't get it. I just couldn't. It just blew my mind.
Well, I thank you for bringing up that kind of real world example, because really this is what Vladimir Lenin is talking about in his book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. Because effectively what he says is this sort of elitist attitude, it leads the people that were of his time, whether you're talking about his direct oppositions and socialist and communist way of thinking, which is the Mensheviks, or those that kind of portrayed the cause, which was the Socialist Democratic Party that was in Germany, like your Kortskys and all of that. He basically kind of divides them into two groups. So you have the group which is your elitist, like the group that you were probably mentioning that you met recently, that says, this is my way of doing it. Either it's my way or the highway. Or you have a group that ultimately they rise to a certain amount of power and they ultimately betray their group. They actually side with the bourgeoisie or whoever's in power. And at least when I was reading the book, he does it in a very fascinating way, because where he divides all of the chapters is all of these things that a socialist would think, huh? Like, what? Why are you saying that? So effectively, he goes in one chapter, oh, do you work with reactionary trade unions? And take this into consideration that previously we've talked about how Rosa Luxemburg have said, well, trade unions are part of the reformist mindset, so you shouldn't really work with them, or at least they're working against the cause. Then in another chapter, he talks about, well, should you work within a parliament, especially one that is run by the Tsar and is basically a sham? And then, in the one of the last few chapters, he goes, well, do you work with the bourgeoisie? And in each chapter, he says exactly the opposite of what you'd think. And he goes, in each chapter, yes, you should. But the first reaction that these initial two groups that I was telling you about, the elitist and the betrayer, that would be like, oh, you're betraying the cause. What are you doing, Lenin? But he each time says, no, 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 you don't quite understand what I'm saying. By putting for the elitist, by putting yourself in the box, you're not actually increasing class consciousness. All you're doing is basically creating an echo chamber, and you're not really achieving anything.
Right, right.
And for the reformist, or at least the betrayer, effectively what they've done is they've lost sight of what's important, in the sense of, okay, so you've increased class consciousness, you've come to the first sign of seizing power. So, say, for example, there was a certain treaty that needed to be signed. What Lenin is saying is the difference between the Bolsheviks and, at the very least, what happened to the German Social Democratic Party is, when it came to a treaty in between 1905 up until the October Revolution, Lenin and the Bolsheviks looked at the treaty and was like, okay, ultimately, is this increasing class consciousness, and is this signing this treaty, is it betraying the masses and the proletarians? And they made sure that before signing this, was this consistent with bringing the proletariat and the vanguard and the masses forward. So there's nothing wrong with a tactical retreat. There's nothing wrong with a Sun Tzu art of war, changing tact and basically, gathering your losses, and then in a situation like the October Revolution, rising up again. There's nothing wrong with that. But what is wrong is betraying the proletariat vanguard, betraying the masses and the peasantry. That's where there's something different, because there's a difference between making a tactical retreat and betraying your values.
Right. Right. And I feel like, look, there's no betrayal of the working class in what these people are doing, the people that I've described to you, kind of thing. There's no... they're not looking to get some type of gain out of betraying the working class, as it were. It's just the fact that, and I think there was a couple of things that you said there that resonated with me, is that they're setting up these groups and stuff like that that are quite insular, and in effect will cause or create echo chambers for themselves. And they're putting themselves away in these little groups, and they're detaching themselves away from the larger vision, which is revolution and all that sort of stuff that I discussed before. And by doing that, that echo chamber just creates this environment where they're just serving their own interests. They're patting themselves on the back, they're big noting themselves, and they're really making it about an us versus them thing within the left. They're not looking at opponents of the left. They're not looking at opponents of the working class, like the reactionary classes, the like right-wing movements, maybe fascist movements, neo-Nazi movements. They're not looking at things that would traditionally be, oppositional matters to the wills and the vision of the working class. They're literally setting up those barriers between them and other people just like themselves, just because, they want to say, ha, 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 we're better than you.
Yeah.
And it's just, to me, it just seems like such a waste. And there must be some form of explanation for this. Why can't people with the same vision, the same long-term vision and goal, accept their differences and just get on with things in order to make the next step that's necessary on the road to revolution and stuff? Why would they set up little barriers for themselves? Like, if it's true that the left, from a working class sense, is all about, honestly, the power comes from numbers. Okay, the ruling class owns all of the tools of oppression, and they can, give the order, and they can have an army at their disposal, a militarized police force, the courts and the judicial system and all of these mechanisms to hold the man down. And really the only thing that, the masses of people got is the sheer numbers and the fact that they are a working class of people. So like in a system like we've got, an economy like we've got, if they all decide to just go on a general strike tomorrow, it'll bring the economy to a halt, and all the rich and the powerful will actually feel it where it hurts them the most, in the pockets. And like, these are the types of people on the left that are just conscious of the power that they have, being through solidarity and unity. And then the first thing they do when they get the chance is divide themselves into little groups and then fight amongst, like, real small issues about, what to call ourselves, or like, what position we should take on this micro issue, or like, what is the correct way to approach, this subject, or move into the next phase of this and stuff like that. Like, it's almost laughable. But like, at the same time, very confronting for me, because like, it seems like all these people have to do is just, open up a little bit more, and they could get some real unity going instantly. And so like the part of, like, I haven't read this left-wing communism and infantile disorder, but if anything captures from that title for me and resonates with me, it's just the words infantile disorder, because this type of behavior on a supposedly educated and conscious left seems infantile, and it seems like some type of disorder, if you like.
Well, yeah. Like, I've like, it's good that you've I guess honed in on that idea of infantile disorder, because in each chapter, when he's going through, do we work with these people, do we work with those people, he keeps on saying that the elitists, as well as the betrayers, each time they make fundamental mistakes of, hey, our way or the highway, in whatever respect, or at the very least they lose their nerve and they just recommit to I guess the status quo, because that's another huge aspect of the at least the betrayer aspect of it, is that they feel like they're losing their grasp on power, or they feel like it's just far more easier to side with the bourgeoisie or whoever's in power, that they ultimately betray their values. So I think this is the reason why at the very start of the book, Lenin mentions the iron will of the Russian proletarians and the Soviet councils. Like, he hammers home that you need to be strong-willed as well as flexible. And this is why I've brought up previously that what's interesting about this book is doing socialism on hard mode, because it's almost as if the October Revolution being successful was Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks doing two things at once. They're both iron-willed and flexible. They're both, sorting themselves out in the short term and looking into the long term. There's almost a two-pronged approach. There's a hammer and anvil with every single tactic that they do. And it's only because they were able to keep everything together in this regard, that they were able to win the October Revolution, and 2.5 years down the track when this book was read, that they were able to keep power because they were not afraid to be flexible, but everyone was on the same page.
Yeah, and
And
I feel like the flexibility is completely lost here, and it's just like a parade or a competition amongst like factions that are really supposedly trying to achieve the same thing here, but they're just they're just petty. They're arguing over petty things, which just achieves nothing. And like for an example, like when I was in discussions with these Marxists, okay, like there's a big I guess a big lesson that Marx had to teach. And one of those ideas is this idea that the dominant ideology that exists in a given society is that which is passed on by its ruling class. So this happens throughout the ages. It's not unique to, the capitalist economy that we have at the moment. It happened in feudal societies, happened in antiquity, happened in slave societies, what have you. The way of thinking, the ideology comes from the ruling class. So as a subset of that, the way that the ruling class will keep everyone in check is not just by force, but they oppress people using their ideology, like the way that things are expected of people. There are people that have more than others, and there are some people at the bottom, while there's some people at the top. There's these ideas about family units or sexist ideals, gender relations in society. A man goes to work, or the woman stays home and looks after the home and looks after the kids and all that sort of stuff. These types of ideologies and kind of rules, if you will, about society are what helps reinforce and keep people in place. They keep the oppressed, and they keep the oppressors on the top and able to oppress. So from this idea, any of the struggles that you could look at, any of the forms of oppression from, sexuality, gender, any of the forms of oppression that you could look at are all granted through the ideology of the ruling class. In this case, or in our world, in the modern world at the moment, it's through capitalism. So it's through our rich and powerful, our business classes, our corporate overlords. They set the types of agendas that dictate to us the types of oppression in society. And so you have these people, the ones that I was engaged in discussion with, that are looking to tackle certain forms of oppression, certain hot topics, if you will, things that were kind of funky at the time. So they were singing about their achievements when it came to the marriage equality laws that changed in Australia recently at the federal level. They're talking about trans rights at the moment. They're looking at things through the lens of making things better for the refugees, and trying to make wins against the government who's stopping the boats. They've even brought in on ideas about sex workers and the sex industry, and whether or not those people should be protected by unions, and whether or not they should be regulated, and all this sort of stuff. And these are all forms of oppression which are good matters to deal with and have to address. But in Marxist ideology, or in Marx's lessons that he taught to these people, right, it's basically like you don't have to worry about those struggles individually. Identity politics, let's just sum it up. You don't have to worry about those individual forms of struggle, because if you remove the ruling class and the system of oppression, in this case, in our society, capitalism, then all of the forms of repression die away. All of them.
Hmm.
And so in saying all of that, it was a really big way of me just setting it up for the fact that this particular group of people, I guess, would define themselves along the lines of the oppressed classes or the oppressed groups of people that they fight for. And that's how they delineate themselves from other leftist groups, from other socialist groups. This is the types of oppression that we fight for, and all the other types of leftists who don't fight for these ones are not real socialists. They're not real leftists, and they're not doing the right thing. We have the right issues we're fighting for. But if they are real Marxists, if they're really going to go back to the origin of all this sort of stuff, they wouldn't be focusing on where they split themselves up along different lines of oppression. Fine, fight for them, go for it, but you wouldn't define yourself on those boundaries, because the end goal would be to revolutionize and overthrow the ruling class in order to remove all forms of oppression for everyone, therefore solve the issue for everyone. And the only way to do that is to unify and to get everyone on the same page, instead of just being like, hey, our fight is better than yours, like all that sort of stuff. Unify and just get things on the way. And it feels like we were saying before, they're not interested in that. It's actually, a bit of an opportunity. You join a group and then you virtue signal about how good your struggle is. My struggle's better than yours. I got it out, I whipped it out and measured it, and like my struggle's better. So, I'm a better leftist than you are. And that sort of stuff, like, honestly, makes me sick. As a revolutionary, makes me sick.
Yeah, because I think this kind of brings back to what Lenin was saying in the book, is that I think this was particularly about the passage of, do we work within a parliament? And he does talk about how leading up to the October Revolution is what was really important about the parliament was not necessarily reforming the Tsarist regime. Effectively, what it was about was getting in there and talking about their propaganda and talking about, hey, masses, hey, proletarian vanguard, this is what we plan to do. Hey, look at the Tsar, look at the Mensheviks. They're just running off to the Tsar and the bourgeoisie. We're the ones that are going to look after you. And slowly but surely, people were like, oh yeah, maybe we should join the Soviet councils. It sounds like the Bolsheviks actually know what they're doing. And that slow process and I guess the air being ripe for a revolution, they were ready to pounce when the time came. And actually, he even says, hey, leading up to the October Revolution, the Mensheviks kind of folded, and they were like, oh, yeah, nobody's supporting us anymore. Everyone's gone over to the Soviet councils. And they folded and sided with the Bolsheviks, and then the October Revolution happened. And also that's the period where Trotsky comes over and is a huge influence leading up to the October Revolution, and then bang, the Bolsheviks are in power. And it was that goes back to what I was saying before, that consistency, but also. So basically, what they're consistent about is their what and their goals. What they aren't consistent about, or they are flexible, is the how. So, 1905 revolution. Yeah, let's do some illegal tactics. Let's agitate. Let's rise up because we think we're right. Oh, yeah, I guess that wasn't quite right. Let's learn from our mistakes. Let's join the Tsarist parliament where we can promote our ideology again. Build. Oh, look, October Revolution. Hey, guys, you've been listening to us. See, we've got the right attitude. Create the Soviet councils. Boom, we're in power.
Yeah, it seems like it really comes down to building momentum and within reason, inclusion, being inclusive. Exclusion in the leftist movement is just antithetical to the cause. The movement in and of itself, like I've already said before, is power in numbers. It's power in numbers. It's getting as many people educated on this issue as possible. So then at least they're conscious of the fact that if they feel like joining in, they can do it. And if they feel like contributing, then great, get on board and stuff like that. But being exclusive, just making yourself, putting yourself up above someone else just for the sheer fact that, I don't know, it gives you some type of trip and you get some type of satisfaction out of it, fine. But then, do that some other way. Get out of the leftist movement, get out of the revolutionary cause, because you're just damaging its reputation and you're making people that potentially, might be susceptible or have some type of tendency towards this thing, you're pushing them away, because if they don't fit your mold, then, and like you give them a reason to walk away, they'll probably do it. They're probably on the cusp of not really being engaged anyway, and they'll just walk away from the cause if necessary. It just
There's also one more aspect that I'll probably add as well, is that like where the Bolsheviks were consistent on the what and the goals, and they were flexible on how, is one thing I will say that I think probably led them to coming into power was, I would find, though, at least leftist groups that are kind of focused on this kind of nitty-gritty stuff. Another aspect of it that they kind of get bogged down is, because we've disagreed on the how, I've noticed that you've completely betrayed me. And for that betrayal, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And another aspect that I found very interesting about this book, with the Infantile Disorder, is Lenin and the Bolsheviks were very cognizant of the fact that that the Mensheviks, the bourgeoisie, anyone else that they worked with, that ultimately they didn't have exactly the same goals, and that there was always the possibility that they were going to be betrayed. So they tried to set up like temporary alliances or that sort of thing. And ultimately, if they were to get betrayed, they didn't get bogged down in the specifics. And they were like, okay, this is a setback. Let's change tact and rebuild again. And that kind of, I get knocked down, I get it up again attitude is what led them to, one, winning over the people, and two, actually being successful.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot to learn from that. And if people have already had to learn those lessons, then they've forgotten them and they need to relearn them, and they need to relearn them now, because it's never going to get anywhere apart from like these little like cliques of people and these little like, groups of experts or of people that just are basically just patting each other on the back. And they're not really going to advance the larger cause, the greater cause, more than they have to this day, which is, to be quite frank, unfortunately, there's the working class movement, the socialist movement, the leftist movement, whatever you want to call it, is just a shadow of its former self from, pre-World War times or 150 years ago. It really is non-existent.
Yeah,
if you look at it in those terms.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that it hasn't been completely smashed by capitalism and propaganda and Western policy, but nonetheless, it's not doing itself any favors by carving itself up into little groups and then making it an us versus them thing from the inside. There needs to be some unity. There needs to be some solidarity. And I don't just mean talking about it, because there seems to be a lot of this rhetoric about, yeah, let's do this, let's do that. But like when push comes to shove, it's just words. It's just words. And so the question is really, and this is something that I'm going to have to take on myself, and I think I'm going to have to try and make this one of my goals, is, how do we break down those barriers, and how do we get some actual unity going on in the revolutionary movement?
Well, Lenin actually covers this, and this is probably taking us to our next segment of what can we do next. And I've noticed, both with myself and probably you've noticed it as well, Mr. E, is that people have jumped on to our content, and well, they very recently have said like, oh, thank you for letting me know about this stuff. It's very interesting, but what next? Like, what can I do? Like, I can obviously learn this content, but what can I do next? And this may be very bleak, but this is basically Lenin's response to it, is that, yes, like, as a starter, you should definitely educate yourself in this kind of political theory, and you should, encourage your friends, encourage the people around you, and create that class consciousness, because ultimately you are part of the masses. And if you do educate yourself, you can be part of the proletarian vanguard in leading us to socialism. But the question is, which he says is, yes, class consciousness, propaganda, and like educating yourself, it is only going to get you so far. Because he talks about a lot of, there were people in the in-between periods, and even before 1905, so the in-between periods of 1905 and 1917, and before 1905, where there was a lot of people that were like, oh, things are the way they are. Yeah, it's kind of all right here. So there was very apathetic masses at the time. And he very clearly says, yes, but you, at least within good times, at least within peace times, there's really not much you can do about it except talk to the people you can. But effectively what he says is the reason why the October Revolution was successful was, one, they were ready with it, with the Soviet councils and having the proletarian vanguard ready. But two, they were successful because it was a crisis. The masses were open for change. They were open to see, yeah, the Tsar has done absolutely nothing for us. The bourgeoisie have done absolutely nothing for us. Hey, Bolsheviks, you look like a good option. Let's go with you. And they were successful. So this is very bleak, but effectively what Lenin is saying is, well, before we can have a socialist revolution, especially a socialist revolution in a well-to-do country, a very affluent country like we have here in Australia, things are going to have to get much worse before they can get better.
Yeah, I understand. There's a lot of credence to the idea, and just a general common sense that it's in times of crises that real things are forged and new movements are started and all that sort of stuff. So I get that understanding. Bleak as it is, I think there is a lot of merit to that notion. So it's educate and unify in the meantime, and jump on the opportunity when it presents itself.
Yeah, because I think what he also goes into is, well, the October Revolution was almost overnight. And I guess the link in the chain was the crisis, but the crisis was really sudden. But the Soviets and the Bolsheviks were ready for it. And it's almost like having an athlete, doing all the training, doing all the sit-ups, doing all the push-ups, training and training and training for 10 years, and is just waiting for that starter gun to go off.
Yeah.
And really, they can't do anything until the starter gun goes off, because, you can't run the race before the race happens.
Yeah.
And at least, well, I don't know whether, I don't know, in the next few years, then we might see a different approach appear. And at least if we have the proletarian vanguard appear here in like more developed countries, they can take that new method. But at least the method in front of us is being ready for when the crisis happens.
That's right.
And while it's bleak, it's what's improved.
I think we'll end it on that kind of famous idea or saying that, it's better to be prepared without an opportunity than to have an opportunity and not be prepared for it. So I get that sentiment and that understanding. It's arm ourselves in the peace times and prepare for war, and get ready for it. Yeah, because it could come at any time. So yeah, I like that ideal. That should get me through some of the, the disillusionment that I'm having at the moment, and the despair that I've encountered in the last, over the last week. So thank you for running me through that 4IS. It's been a bit of a counselling session for me.
You're all right. You're all right, Mr. A. I guess what you're also in, like, I think the reason why you were disillusioned as well is that I feel like a lot of socialist groups, what they talk about is step one, class consciousness, and having that proletarian vanguard or whoever are the intellectuals that will lead the people to a socialist revolution. They then like kind of shrug at step two, or at least they don't talk about it. And then they talk about step three, which is revolution. And that's where people get very confused, is that they're like, well, what about step two? You haven't told me how you're going to do it. And at least Lenin in his book is very upfront with how it's achieved, is, hey, yeah, you can do step one quite clearly, and yeah, you've already achieved it in step three, but it's that step 1.5 that you have to be vigilant about, is that it's do as much as you can in peace times, so when it's bad times, you can capitalize, no pun intended, and I guess take advantage of the crisis situation, or at least the power vacuum, and get that socialist revolution.
Well said. Well said.
And I'm sure people have just realized that naturally we have another synthwave art in the background. I'm sure Mr. Reed will probably show this later in the editing, but we've got a picture in the background where it looks like it's a mountain with two faces, one with an older gentleman with a massive eyebrow, and then it seems a smaller creature that's a cyclops that's on the mount of it. So I'd be curious as to what the prompt for this one is. I'll let people comment on it down below. And I guess with that, that's this week. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. And remember, keep thinking and keep learning. Mystery, over to you.
And thank you, 4IS. To all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.